Thank you. If you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you'll know that we're looking at the Gospel of Mark, and we are particularly focusing in on the actions and the behavior of Jesus, and what that demonstrates for us, what that models for us about how to live our lives right. And I don't know about you, but for me, I love looking at the Gospels this way. I really love focusing in this way, because as soon as you focus on the behavior of Jesus and the way he was, you begin to see again just how compelling this man is. You know, he is strong, he is authoritative, he is confident, he is powerful, and yet he's also unceasingly compassionate. You know, time after time, interaction after interaction, he is pouring love and grace and mercy into the lives of the people that he meets. He is approachable, he is humble, he is patient, he is kind, he is gentle, he is good. He is so good. And it is a joy to just watch him in action. And it's even more of a joy when we just step back for a minute and we think about what that means for us. Because Jesus isn't just a man. Gareth said a couple of weeks ago, Jesus Christ is perfect theology. That means he is the perfect reflection of the nature and character of God. Which means what we're seeing in these pages, in the Gospels, in this life, in this man, is a tangible representation of the heart behind our world. And what a soul-stirring, uplifting thought that is, as we get up each morning and we face the day, whatever we're going through, whatever we're experiencing, whatever we're seeing in the news, knowing in our hearts that there is hope, because what lies behind it all, the nature that will outlast it all, is good. Is this good, strong, powerful, authoritative, compassionate, merciful, loving, gracious, patient, humble, kind, gentle, good, so good. It makes my heart want to sing when I see Jesus in action. But there is another side to looking at the Gospels in this way that is a little bit more challenging for us. And that is that Jesus doesn't just encourage us to marvel at him. He encourages us to imitate him, to be like him. Not just to celebrate his compassion and his grace and his mercy and his love and his goodness, but to embody it and to be it for our world. We are to be like him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same ways in which he walked. 1 John 2:6. And I don't know about you, but when I look at Jesus' life in that way and I start thinking about my life and things that I've done and the way I responded to that situation and the way I thought about those people, and I start to just feel a tug. You know, I feel a little discomfort, a little frustration. Be like Jesus. Walk in the way that Jesus walked. Are you serious? Have you seen this man? Have you seen what he's like? I can't even get stuck in a traffic jam without the thin veneer of civility falling away from me. If you ever get to talk to Susan Ash, you should ask her what happens to me when I get stuck in a bank holiday weekend traffic jam on the way to Wimpole Hall. She would have a story to tell you. Let me tell you. I'm not going to tell you that story, but suffice to say, Jesus would have handled that situation better. I'll leave it at that. Enough said. Where does the strength come from? Where does the resilience come from? Where does the calm come from? To be more like that in our lives? Well, Paul gives us one answer in 1 Thessalonians 5. It's the end of this letter that he wrote to the Thessalonian church. And he leaves them with some encouragement and some instruction. And he begins to spell out what it means in practice to walk in the way that Jesus walked. And this is the way that he put it. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened. Help the weak. Be patient with everyone. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. Rejoice always, pray continually. What Paul is saying here is that if we are to imitate Jesus, if we are to go out into the world in the way that Jesus did, we're going to face some stuff. There are plenty of people out there who need plenty from us. We're going to come across people who are in moments of great weakness, vulnerability, who need our help. People who are disheartened, without hope, ready to give up, who need to be picked up, who need to be built up, who need to be reassured, who need to be encouraged. We're going to come across some people who are disruptive and difficult and challenging and abrasive and awkward, people who it seems like have just set themselves up in their lives to make our lives more difficult. I wonder, do you know anybody like that? They need us to stand with them and to love them and to honor them and be honest with them and be patient with them and to seek their good. Don't let people repay wrong for wrong. That means we are going to come across people in this world who have been wronged by the world. People who are hurting, people who are broken, people perhaps who are lashing out, and we're to stand with them. We're to love them. We're to be patient with them. We're to seek their good. This is what it means, says Paul, to walk in the way that Jesus walked. And it is a wonderful, inspiring image of life, but my goodness, this is no picnic. You know, if we are honest with ourselves, you know, this is inspiring, but this is also an exhausting, draining, impossible image of life. You know, if we stop in verse 15 here and we, in isolation, just try and imitate Jesus, we just try and copy his behavior, then we're going to fail. And you know, in my experience, if your experience is ever anything like mine, you're going to fail big and you're going to fail fast. But, you know, Paul doesn't stop in verse 15 here. He goes on to give us the powerhouse behind this lifestyle, the fuel behind this lifestyle. Verse 16, rejoice always. Verse 17, pray continually. 14 and 15 are all about the external. They're all about nurturing the world around us. But in 16 and 17, Paul flips and it becomes about the internal. It becomes about nurturing and looking after ourselves. 14 and 15 are about giving of ourselves, giving out of ourselves. 16 and 17 are about receiving, about filling ourselves up so that we might give. And they are part of one and the same list. They are intrinsically linked. You cannot have the former without the latter, says Paul. There is an equation here. Prayer brings joy, brings resilience to live this extraordinary life. Prayer brings joy, brings resilience to live this extraordinary life. Paul is exhorting us here as we go through this follow series and we seek to imitate Jesus, to have a holistic vision of what it means to imitate Jesus. Not just trying to copy his external behavior, to try and emulate the richness of his external ministry to others, without also imitating what he does to cultivate the richness of inner character that powers it all, his relationship with God, his prayer life. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because this is where we've got to in Mark this morning. We're in Mark 1:35, and for the last 19 verses, and in fact for the next 5 or 6 chapters in the future, we're seeing Jesus doing Jesus' thing. Healing, delivering, being gracious, being compassionate, being loving, being merciful, giving. But here in verse 35, we see for a moment a window into the other side, the flip side, the other side of the coin, as he turns from nurturing the world and modeling what that means to modeling what it means to nurture yourself, nurture your inner character and your relationship with God. So let me read it to you here. So this is Mark 1:35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. This is why I have come." So, short passage this morning, and just 2 points to draw from it. 1, Jesus' model for the priority of prayer, and 2, Jesus' model for the heart of prayer. Firstly, priority. When people heard about Jesus' power and the way that he was choosing to employ it, the response was overwhelming. Everybody wanted a piece of this action. Everybody wanted an appointment. And we see it in our passage here this morning. Simon Peter exclaiming, "Jesus, everybody is looking for you. Everybody's looking for you." And we see it repeated through Mark. Crowds of people searching after and pursuing Jesus. This is a time of extraordinary opportunity for him. He has so much to give, so many people to help, so much to do, so much wisdom to impart, so much to say, tremendous popularity, extreme busyness. But nevertheless, in verse 35, we see that he doesn't get swept up in that, he doesn't get distracted by it, but he remains intentional about turning around, stepping aside, and carving out space for quiet, contemplative, personal prayer. The busier Jesus gets, the more he has to do, the more opportunity there is in front of him, the more we see him pray. He sends his disciples out ahead of him so that he can spend time alone in prayer. He goes out to the wilderness. He withdraws to a mountainside. We see it over and over again. And this is not just squeezing in a little bit of prayer before the real work of the day begins. This is serious. This is an investment. He gets up very early. He doesn't just go to a quiet place in the house, but he goes out of the house, to the wilderness, to the desert, to the uninhabited places, to find solitude, to carve out space for prayer. And he doesn't stop praying until the rest of the people in his party have woken up, got up, had their breakfast, got dressed, brushed their teeth, sat around for a while wondering where Jesus is, formed a search party, gone out into the wilderness, into the wilds, and found him. You know, this wasn't just 5 minutes of prayer. This was an investment. Jesus is modeling something for us here. If the preeminent, pre-existent Son of God thinks that he needs to prioritize prayer when his life gets busy, then that's good enough for me. Put it another way, in the midst of this extraordinary opportunity, if Jesus, in the midst of all that, with so much to do, so much to give, so much to say, so much to impart, he is on a mission that is utterly changing the world, he can still find time to step aside and to walk away from it, to focus on solitary personal prayer. Then what is it that we're doing that's keeping us so busy, that's so important, that we can't find the time? Jesus is modeling for us the supreme priority of prayer, above all else, above all others, as the powerhouse, as the 1 Thessalonians 5 powerhouse behind our lives. That's point number 1, the priority of prayer. Now, how are you doing on this? How are you doing? As I've been thinking about this talk and preparing it, I think I've got to talk about the priority of prayer, because that's the obvious teaching from this passage. But at the same time, I've been thinking that nobody here needs me up on this stage banging on about prayer being a priority, because you know this. You know, this is not news. I don't think I've ever met a Christian who wouldn't say prayer is a priority. But the interesting thing is that I've also not met that many Christians who in practice are entirely satisfied with their prayer life. And I know a lot of Christians who are not praying as much as they want to or think they should. And I suspect there are people in this room who would admit to, at times, finding prayer more of a struggle than a delight, and more of a burden than a powerhouse behind your life. And so I've been asking myself, why is this? Why does this happen to us? Because, if this is you, you are in good company. This is a common experience. We can be open and honest about it. But why does it happen? And what is it in the way that Jesus models prayer that can help us in this? And so this is point number 2, the heart behind prayer modeled by Jesus. I think that prayer becomes a burden for us when we take on board what he says, what Jesus models for us about the priority of prayer, that we've got to do it. But we don't take on board, we don't absorb what he models for us about the heart of prayer. So go with me on this. The way that Jesus prayed in the Gospels is different to what came before him. And our cultural distance from the text sometimes makes that difficult for us to see. In Mark 14, when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, it's one of the only times that we see the actual words of Jesus' prayer in the book of Mark. And the first word out of his mouth is Father. In fact, it's Abba, Father. Abba being the Aramaic, familiar, intimate, childlike, diminutive term for father that would translate as daddy, dada. This is simple, intimate, close language. And it's the same every time we see Jesus praying in the Gospels. Every time except one. There's one exception. But every time in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see Jesus taking as the starting point, the founding principle of his prayer, this word, Father. And that's the way he prayed. That was his consistent, way of beginning prayer. And it wasn't just him. He also taught others to do the same. When the disciples asked him, how do we pray? He gave them the Lord's Prayer. And what is the foundation stone of the Lord's Prayer? What is the starting point? What is the first word out of the mouth? Father. Father if you're in Luke, our Father if you're in Matthew. Father. Now, this isn't the first time that God has been given sort of paternal characteristics in the Bible. In the Old Testament, he's quite often referred to as the Father of Israel or the Father of his people. But this is the first time that we are seeing a Jewish teacher consistently and directly addressing God as his personal Father. And what's more, encouraging others to do the same. It doesn't seem strange to us, but what we have to understand is that in the culture in which he was operating, that would have been extraordinary. That would have been shocking. That wouldn't have gone unnoticed. People would have heard, what is he saying? Who does he think he is? As usual, Jesus is being very intentional about his language. Jesus is communicating something in the way that he prays. Jesus is modeling something for us. Jesus is saying that with me, in me and through me, prayer is different. That the heart of Christian prayer, the foundation, the first principle, the starting point from which everything else flows, is not asking God for things. It's not seeking God's forgiveness. It's not even thankfulness for God's blessing. All of that stuff is good and it's important, but the founding principle, the starting point, it's not petition, it's not confession, it's not thankfulness, it's orientation. Orientation. Father. When we turn our face in prayer, we are turning ourselves, we are refocusing our minds, we are realigning. We are allowing our perspective to be shaped by, and we are living out an extraordinary truth that through Jesus, the cosmic Lord of the universe is no longer an inaccessible, unapproachable, distant authority, but has become your personal Father. When we pray, we are searing our minds with that extraordinary truth, that the infinity of God, the transcendent power that created and holds all things together, is focused right on us, right on you, and filtered through tender, affectionate, adoring, unconditional, patient, merciful, paternal love. Now that is game-changing. That is life-changing prayer. That is powerhouse prayer. To be able to go through your day, pray continually. That's day after day, hour after hour through your day, to be able to step aside out of the situation that you're in, out of the experience that you're living, and take a breath and experience that reality again, that he is good and his goodness is yours and is focused on you. That is life-changing. That is situation change. Doesn't matter what you're going through. The first principle, the heart of Christian prayer, orientation. This is why Jesus ran to prayer whenever his life got busy. And if we absorb that same truth, then prayer stops being a burden for us. It stops being a struggle. We stop worrying about the words. We stop worrying about whether we're worthy. We stop worrying about whether we've got something useful to say. And we just run into his embrace. The mountain where we run, the shadow where we hide, the wind in our sails, the fire in our veins, the safe harbor, home. That is the heart of Christian prayer. I want to sum up this morning by telling you a little story. A couple of years ago, I got a new boss at work and a new managing director. And this is kind of an intimidating thing to happen. You don't know this person. They're coming in. They're new. They're going to have some influence over your life. You've got no idea what to expect. And so I was a bit nervous. I was a bit worried. Wanted to make a good first impression, make sure they didn't fire me. And so I had a strategy. And I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the first couple of days. I'm going to try and keep my head down, stay busy, and sort of watch from afar. And try and get a sense of them, get a sense of their nature and their character, figure them out a bit, plan something to say, make a really great first impression. But my strategy failed because within a couple of hours of this person arriving at work on their first day, I was walking down a corridor with a few colleagues, and there they were walking in the other direction. And they were all chatty and friendly, and they just wanted to introduce themselves and say hello and meet some people. And here we were meeting. And this is not the way it was supposed to work. This is not the way I'd planned it. In fact, I hadn't planned anything. I didn't know what to say. And I had one of those like deer in the headlights brain freeze moments. I don't know if anybody has these. Well, I was listening to them speaking, but in my mind it was just, they're going to stop talking soon. They're going to stop talking soon. What are you going to say? You've got to say something. You're going to say something stupid. What are you going to say? You've got to say something. And that, that's not useful. And I'm afraid I panicked when the moment came. And do you want to know the first words that I ever said to my managing director? Oh, I've done it. That. You have surprisingly white teeth. I'm not proud of this, but I promise you this is 100% true. Daniel. This is not a good thing, in case you're wondering, to say to anybody at any point ever, let alone in that situation. My goodness, that was a bad day. What I want to leave you with this morning is a conviction that prayer is not going to be like that for you. I was intimidated. I was tongue-tied. I didn't know who I was talking to. I was not confident of my status. And I got lost. Jesus doesn't just encourage us to prioritize prayer, but he encourages us to come to prayer not as nervous employees, but as confident children, approaching their loving, adoring Father. I have two sons, and let me tell you, if I were their boss, if they were my employees, they would have been fired years ago. Honestly. But they're not. They're my sons, and I love them. And it doesn't matter what they do or how they are or what mood they're in. I am inclined towards them. I cannot help it. I am their unconditional advocate. No matter what nonsense they're talking, I want to hear it. In fact, I delight in it. Even if they're in a ridiculous, illogical, unfair, unreasonable rage, which happens more than I care to admit. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to know how they feel. Because I'm not their boss, I'm their father. I'm responsible for them. I love them. And the wild, ridiculous, extraordinary thing is that this is how God looks at you in prayer. It doesn't matter what you're saying. It doesn't matter how adept you are at theology. It doesn't matter if you've been studying theology for 30, 40 years or whether you've never opened a Bible in your life, actually. It doesn't matter how articulate you are. It doesn't matter what you've got to say. He delights in it. He loves it because he's your father and he wants you to draw near. It makes me again think about my little boy Joey. He can't speak. He's got no language, but he's got one word, which is just the most beautiful thing you will ever hear, or at least the most beautiful thing I will hear. Dada, Dada. There's nothing complicated about it. There's nothing sophisticated about it, but it melts my heart. It delights me. And the wild, ridiculous, extraordinary truth is that God looks at you like that. Father, God, thank you that you have made yourself this accessible to us, that you have opened yourself to us, that you have made a way, that we don't have to worry anymore. We don't have to concern ourselves with whether we're good enough or whether we've got something useful to say to you, but we know that you just want to hear from us. You just want us, simple, raw, honest, how we are, how we're feeling. You want to know because you're our Father. And it is life-changing. It is a powerhouse thought. And I pray that you will settle it on our hearts today. As we leave this place, as we go out into the world and we face everything that the world has to throw at us, that we always know that we carry the love of our Father, that we've always got our Father listening. Oh, it's glorious, Lord. We love you. We love you. Amen. Thank you. I was just going to say that if anybody wants to respond to anything that I've just said, then the prayer team will be in the corner. If you're not a Christian here this morning, now I want to tell you that this is available to you too, available to you as much as to anybody else in this room. You know, the infinity of God, the transcendent power that created and holds all things together, is available to you, is focused on you right now. And I just encourage you to respond. And if you want to talk to me or talk to anyone else here, I'm sure we'd be really glad to share our experience of what it's like to live with that Father.